The size and scale of this initial rally we've seen in Bitcoin, stepping away from yesterday, versus other stock market rallies is what? Put that in perspective for us.
Oh, in stock market terms, this is literally off the charts. We ran a chart where we compared what we've seen in the last year over Bitcoin. That was excluding yesterday's glorious move and the top year of the Nasdaq bubble, and you can barely even see. It's like a horizontal line for the Nasdaq bubble. You're talking about more than 800% versus 100%. So in terms of stock market, there's just no example of any stock market of any breadth doing anything remotely like this. If you begin to look into commodities, which are more like what people perceive Bitcoin as being, they don't have a yield, or their value is to some extent the value in the eye of the perceiver, then again, it's still pretty much off the charts, gold or silver. Apart
from when you bring in tulip bulbs, which you've done a lot of analysis on.
Which are also commodities of a kind, yes. If you look at the tulip mania in Holland in the 1600s, there were a number of things that were very similar. Tulips were new to Europe at the time. There were such things as tulip derivatives. You could get certificates for taking control of tulips. They changed the regulations. There was a constriction in supply. And yes, you saw the final few months of the tulip craze. You did see a rise that was even greater than what we've seen in the last year or so in Bitcoin. I have to say there were a couple of phases earlier in Bitcoin development when it was a much smaller amount of money at stake, when they more or less did match tulips. But that's the one example you can come up with of any significance.
And of course, we know how the tulip bulb rise ended, which was with a catastrophic fall, of course. Now, if we try and work out some of the possible reasons that could justify this huge run-up in Bitcoin, one that you kind of point to in the article is, of course, the unprecedented printing of money that we have had, that many thought would either lead to a spike in inflation or gold prices. Clearly, inflation hasn't spiked. Is there a possibility that that could explain this, and it's just that this is the currency or commodity that is reacting to that huge wave of money?
There's certainly something to that, yes, although I'm still not clear why you wouldn't just make it gold, which has worked very well whenever you've been worried about debasement of paper currencies in the past. And gold, of course, for the last few years has done nothing special at all. I think where it does fit in, and I've been getting an awful lot of feedback about what I've been writing, obviously, where it does fit in is it fits with the mood of radical distrust in central banks, and I can't blame people for feeling distrustful after the last 10 years, and in governments more broadly. There's this very exciting possibility that this fits in with the notion of a world without governments, and if you are in a stage where you really don't trust democracy, let alone central banks, there's something exciting about Bitcoin.
There's also an interesting angle on the Bitcoin factor that we're starting to say, those of us in this marketplace, that, the more, when you hear people on the street saying, how do I buy Bitcoin, that retail investors are getting involved, that could mark a sign of the top coming closer. But does it also suggest that if the percentage ownership of retail exposure to Bitcoin increases as a percentage of the total, that it makes this sort of potential government clampdown that the likes of Jamie Dimon have pointed to in the past, makes it harder for that to come, and sort of endorses Bitcoin as a commodity or currency a little bit more than it had in the past?
It certainly suggests that we have very difficult and thorny decisions ahead. I mean, we're talking about whatever it's 150. I haven't worked out from the last price because it moves. We're talking about $150 billion or so, which is plenty dealable with for the main Western governments at the moment. Yes, once retail starts to enter in a big way, and also once the big institutions start to enter in a big way, that what our charming friends on Wall Street would call the dumb money starts to enter, then that tends to mean, A, that we're getting to the close of a bubble phase, and B, that it's going to be that much more painful to deal with it once it finally bursts. Yes, if you have people